Weekly goals for this week are to examine how the United States changed because of the Civil War and Reconstruction efforts in the 19th century. Our essential question for this lesson is, how did the economic, political, and social beliefs contribute to the division of the country? The Unit 2, Lesson 1 Vocabulary. Industrialization was a system built on the discovery of interchangeable parts, both machine and mankind. Throughout this presentation, we'll focus on three factors: a timeline of the Industrial Revolution in America, the geography and natural resources of America, and the notable inventions and inventors and the societal changes that those inventions brought about. Starting with Eli Whitney, the inventor of the cotton gin we talked about in Unit 1, he also came up with the idea of interchangeable parts. Before, a worker would spend a great deal of time making a single product by hand. Whitney discovered that a machine could make many copies of the individual parts of a product at once. The parts could then be assembled by any worker. This meant that many goods could be produced quickly, a concept that sparked a revolution abroad in Great Britain and traveled across the globe to the United States, a country far too happy to treat its citizens as interchangeable parts in the cog of an emerging industry. Other changes that helped bring about the Industrial Revolution included the use of steam and later other kinds of power in place of the muscles of human beings and of animals. Another key development was the adoption of the factory system. This system of manufacturing is based on the concentration of industry into specialized and often large establishments. The use of water power and then the steam engine to mechanize processes such as cloth weaving in Britain in the second half of the 18th century marked the beginning of the factory system, a beginning that soon found its way onto American soil as a textile mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1793 used the flying shuttle to revolutionize textile work in America. This was made famous by an English immigrant named Samuel Slater, who was a former assistant to Richard Arkwright, who in 1786 used a steam engine to power a textile mill and the flying shuttle to greatly increase the production of fabric. The Embargo Act of 1807 and the War of 1812 were the springboard for the Industrial Revolution. The Embargo Act of 1807 forced the United States to manufacture their own goods because they would not be able to trade for foreign goods. The War of 1812 revealed the necessity for a better transportation system, economic independence, and independent markets. After both of these events, Americans began to produce their own goods. They began to think of innovative, efficient ways to improve the economy, and they began the Industrial Revolution. Some notable inventions along the industrialization timeline were: in 1834, Cyrus McCormick invented the mechanical reaper to greatly aid in the agricultural process on farms both large and small. 1846, Elias Howe invented the mechanical sewing machine. 1859, Edwin Drake was the first of many who drilled for oil in the United States in Titusville, Pennsylvania. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. In 1879, Thomas Edison invented the modern incandescent light bulb, which was both cheaper and safer than using candles to illuminate rooms. In 1903, The Wright brothers powered and sustained controlled flight for the first time in world history. In 1913, Henry T. Ford invented an assembly line to help aid in the production and manufacturing of his Ford Model T Ford pickup trucks. This assembly line procedure revolutionized American industry, creating a system of work that is easily produced in any situation for almost any type of manufactured good. Textiles were the first mass-produced product made by machines in factories. Textile mills, like shown in the picture here, produced cotton, woolens, and other types of fabrics. They brought jobs to the areas where they were built, and with jobs came economic and societal growth. During the Industrial Revolution, villages and towns often grew up around factories and mills. Before the Industrial Revolution, spinners and weavers made clothing at home by hand. Cotton was spun into thread and then woven into cloth. Later, the cloth was dyed by an artisan. This was known as the cottage industry or domestic system, which was very, very slow. The old ways of making cloth were completely transformed with industrialization. First, the flying shuttle by John Kay, then the spinning jenny by James Hargreaves, the water frame by Richard Arkwright, and finally the spinning mule by Samuel Crompton. The flying shuttle was invented by John Kay in 1733 and was one of the key developments in the industrialization of weaving during the early Industrial Revolution. It allowed a single weaver to weave much wider fabrics, and it could be mechanized, allowing for automatic machine looms. The spinning jenny is a multi-spindle spinning frame and was one of the key developments in the industrialization of textile manufacturing during the early Industrial Revolution. It was invented in 1764 by James Hargreaves. The water frame is a spinning frame that is powered by a water wheel. Water frames in general have existed since ancient Egyptian times, but for this instance, Richard Arkwright, who patented the technology in 1769, designed a model for the production of cotton thread. This was first used commercially in 1765. Spinning mule is a machine used to spin cotton and other fibers. They were used extensively from the late 18th to the early 20th century. Spinning mules were worked in pairs by a minder, usually a woman, with the help of two children, usually boys, the little piercer and the big or side piercer. The Bessemer process was developed by Sir Henry Bessemer of England in 1856. The Bessemer process was the first inexpensive industrial process for the mass production of steel. The key principle is removal of impurities from the iron by oxidation with air being blown through the molten iron. Thomas Savery invented the first commercially used steam power device, the steam engine. Thomas Newcomen developed a successful engine that could power a machine in 1712. And James Watt eventually improved the process in 1764 to what is most commonly used during the Industrial Revolution as a functioning steam engine. As we talked about in Unit 1, Eli Whitney in 1793 invented the cotton gin. It was designed to quickly and easily separate cotton fibers from their seeds. This enabled the much greater production of cotton, a major agricultural crop in the southern United States, for consumption and use in cotton textiles throughout the world. The natural resources available in the United States of America were most plentiful in the Midwest and the western regions of the country. Wood to be used as timber for building and construction, fresh water, coal, iron ore, copper, silver, and gold mines and reserves, oil, the abundance of land, and the fish and game, particularly in the Midwest and Western United States. You can see on the map the various natural resources like fish, coal, oil, forestry land for wood, for timber production, gold and copper reserves. Resources that proved vital in the emergence of America as an industrial power throughout the Industrial Revolution. This world map shows the importance of the United States in international trade routes, where our geography played a vital role in trade and commerce and the expansion of America both as an emerging democracy and as a brand. With the ability to ship manufactured goods directly to Europe across the Atlantic and to Asia directly across the Pacific, the United States is uniquely positioned globally to be at the center of international commerce. The last natural resource is us, humanity, immigrants from every country imaginable. The population in the United States in 1860 was an estimated 30 million people. By 1890, it had doubled to over 60 million people, and by 1920, it had doubled again to over 120 million people. A 400% increase in only 60 years, fueled by the growing interest in America as an emerging industrial powerhouse on the global stage and a place where jobs and land were plentiful. Father of the steel industry, Andrew Carnegie, born November 25, 1835, died August 11, 1919. He was an American industrialist and philanthropist. He built an enormous personal fortune from investments, gave away the modern equivalent of billions of dollars from 1901 to 1919, where he funded over 2,500 public libraries in the US and abroad. His invention and refinement of iron ore into steel helped literally build this country from within. Steel, which helped build the Brooklyn Bridge in 1869, connecting Brooklyn to Manhattan, is the largest suspension bridge span in the world for over 130 years. Steel that helped build the Empire State Building on March 17, 1930 in Manhattan, New York, towering above all other buildings on the island of Manhattan. John D. Rockefeller, father of the oil industry, was born July 8, 1839, died May 23, 1937, was the founder of Standard Oil. John D. Rockefeller was once the most wealthiest American alive. He bought out competitors in a 6-week period to create an oil monopoly. This period was known as the Cleveland Massacre. He established the first United States Business Trust, a group of wealthy industrialists who had control over many corporations related to oil. And Standard Oil's monopoly on the oil industry in the 1800s led to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, breaking up those oil monopolies and allowing the government some control and regulation. The image shown here is of the first oil rig used by John D. Rockefeller. This image depicts a modern oil rig in the Pacific Ocean. You can see them if you ever take a cruise or a ship out to sea, all along the Pacific coast, the Gulf Coast in Mexico, the Atlantic coast. They are literally everywhere. J.P. Morgan, the father of the financial industry, was born April 17th, 1837, died March 31st, 1913. He helped create the Federal Reserve System still in use today, which safeguards our nation's finances. He used his personal power, wealth, and reputation to encourage the formation of trusts and mergers within industries where he saw competition. His financing of other industrialists and consolidated groups helped create the company General Electric. General Electric is still in use today and makes many of the electrical components that are used in everyday construction of homes, buildings, and schools. J.P. Morgan went into banking in 1857 in London. He co-founded the banking company Drexel Morgan and Company 24 years later in 1871 in New York City. This is their first branch in New York City. Now, J.P. Morgan has over 26,000 employees and is one of the world's largest financial institutions whose stock is traded across the globe. Two terms to be familiar with are robber barons compared to captains of industry. Each were rich, successful industrialists and often big business owners. But whereas a robber baron created harsh and dangerous working conditions where they sought to maximize their personal profit at all costs, they did so by paying workers as little as possible, and they fired anyone who spoke out against their harsh conditions and low pay. Captains of industry, on the other hand, created safe industries for workers, generous donations to community and to their country, and they offered fair wages and benefits for their employees. They also uniquely sought improvement from their employees, ways that they can make their industry better and safer. The societal changes and lasting impacts of the Industrial Revolution are similar to the changes before and after the Civil War. Pre-Industrial Revolution, over 90% of Americans worked in the agricultural industry, where most lived on or near their farmland in rural conditions. Local products were manufactured for a local market, where small independent businesses and enterprises were commonplace. There was no electricity and little to no communication other than mail or the Pony Express. After the Industrial Revolution, a majority of Americans worked in industries or enterprises in or near cities. Most people lived in or near their company in densely populated cities, oftentimes in tenement or apartment buildings. Goods were mass produced for an international marketplace. There were large multi-regional and national businesses that took over for the small, family-run, independent businesses. Electricity was available in nearly every home and tenement building across America, where communication was made easier with the mail, Pony Express, telephones, telegraphs, and Morse code.